This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On July 13, 2016, the Institute hosted Lieutenant Commander Lucas Kenward of HMCS Edmonton, who briefed the gathering on Canada's involvement in the multinational anti-narcotic Operation Caribbe.
So without any further ado, I would like to have Lieutenant Commander Lucas Kenward come and present to us this evening.
You're here.
All right, I don't normally do this with a microphone, so this is going to be a bit bizarre. If you can't hear me in the back, just let me know. Thank you, Michael. Thank you to the membership here at the RCMI. It is beyond a pleasure for me to be here. I've never been to this facility before. I have to say, wow, what a location to have an event like this in such a historic library. Like Michael had talked about earlier, I found a very dated copy of The Law of the Sea sitting in one of the bookshelves here, which is fabulous because a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight directly relates to the Law of the Sea and what gives us the authority to do it. The slide says the RCN and Op Caribbe. It's really more than that. Op Caribbe is a pan-Canadian forces, no nomenclature, Canadian Armed Forces mission. So it involves the Air Force and the Navy in particular, but there are also Army elements that are here. So the title may be a little bit misleading, but nonetheless, I hope you find the subject matter interesting. Again, we go through the usual PowerPoint pro forma that I've been taught to do ever since I joined the Naval Service. So this is a brief overview of what we're going to talk about, and I'll quickly skip ahead. So we'll talk about what Operation Caribbe is. So what it is a Canadian operation that is part of Operation Martillo. And Operation Martillo is a multinational operation. Directly translated, Martillo means hammer. So Operation Hammer is a multinational operation to combat counter-narcotics operations in the Eastern Pacific and in the Caribbean Sea. So we call it Operation Caribbe, but if you speak to your American counterparts and you say Operation Martillo, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. The United States does take the lead in Operation Martillo because they initially established it in a way to combat drug trafficking that was starting in South Florida in the 1980s. Okay, so the Joint Interagency Task Force South is who I work for when I'm conducting Operation Caribbe. So they have TACOM of me while I'm down there. And really, JIATF South came into being because of the incredible amount of cocaine drug trafficking that was happening in South Florida. Had a conversation earlier tonight talking about cigar boats and cigarette boats and things of that nature that would come from Cuba. Back in the 1980s, that was the Miami Vice reality. People were running cocaine from the Caribbean Sea into South Florida. It was hugely destabilizing to Miami, and as such, the Vice President established a joint interagency task force to deal with it, to get all the law enforcement agencies from Miami-Dade County, from the FBI, the CIA, the DEA, get them all in one room, communicating together to try to stop the drug trafficking in South Florida. It was remarkably successful. So much so that cocaine stopped flowing into Miami and South Florida and instead went to Texas and Louisiana. So as a result of that, they stood up other task forces in those other cities and states, which were also successful, but yet they never really worked together. President Reagan decided that he'd institute National Security Directive 221, which basically established narcotics trafficking as a national security threat, which led to the establishment of the official Joint Interagency Task Force South, which to this day is still based out of Key West, Florida. Okay, JIATF's mission is to detect and monitor all the vessels that are underway at sea in order to ascertain who's trafficking drugs into the United States. But it's expanded beyond that, because the drug traffickers always adapt. So they're moving the product not into the United States directly because that's become far too risky. And instead they're moving it into other nations with land access routes into the United States. So that means primarily Guatemala and Mexico. And some of the trafficking does come to Canada, but over the land routes, not through the marine system. And the reason for that will become self-evident as we go through the lecture a little bit more. GIADF's goal is to eliminate the flow of illicit drugs in their operating area. And their operating area is the Caribbean Sea and a humongous chunk of the Eastern Pacific Ocean. I'll show you a slide later that really puts into perspective how large the area is. Are we ever going to get there to eliminating the flow of illicit drugs? Probably not. We don't have enough ships, we don't have enough aircraft, we don't have enough personnel or law enforcement detachments to make that a reality. That's just a simple fact. But what we can do is achieve 100% domain awareness of illicit trafficking. Thanks to technology, thanks to all the other agencies that are working with GIADF South, we're very close, I think, to achieving that 100% domain awareness. So we know what every vessel on the high seas is doing and where they're going. GIADF South, like I said, is multinational. Canada, of course, is a member of the GIADF South organization, as are the countries that you see on the screen. Now, you might ask yourself why the Netherlands and the France and the United Kingdom might be interested. Well, they have protectorate states in the Caribbean Sea that they're interested in stopping the flow of drugs to. And of course, all these Central and Latin American countries, in some cases, are the countries where the product originates from, or countries where the product is going to. In particular, though, the three main nations that participate in GIADF, at least on the Eastern Pacific side, are quite obviously Canada, the United States, and Mexico. We have reciprocal agreements with GIADF South with a bunch of other countries, including Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which I'll get into a little bit later about how that comes into play. Suffice to say that GIADF South is really an intelligence fusion center that gets us the information that we need to find the vessels that are underway at sea trafficking drugs. It's important to note that they also include the intelligence agencies, such as the CIA, the NSA, the NRO. There's a whole bunch of different organizations in the United States, and they're fusing all this information together. So as you can imagine, GIADF South has incredible intelligence ability resident there in Key West. That's all fine and good, but it doesn't really help us actually get the product off the street, as it were. So in order to do that, we need to be empowered by some sort of legislation. So in Canada, we're empowered through the National Defence Act to conduct military operations. But it is really the law of the sea and the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea that provides us with the ability to do the mission set that we want to do. Article 108 of UNCLOS talks about drug trafficking being more or less the equivalent of piracy, which allows warships the ability to conduct anti-narcotics operations on the high seas. As a warship captain, automatically under UNCLOS, I have the ability to challenge any vessel on the high seas to establish their nationality if they're not flying a flag. As you'll see shortly, a lot of these vessels involved in drug trafficking don't fly flags for obvious reasons. So automatically I have the ability to just query and find out what their nation state is. In 2010, D&D and the United States Coast Guard signed a Memorandum of Understanding that now allowed me to take a U.S. Coast Guard law enforcement detachment on board my ship and provide support to them in conducting law enforcement operations. It is to be clear, though, that I provide this direct support to them in international waters only, and I don't do law enforcement. The United States Coast Guard does. The United States Coast Guard is empowered by their own national legislation in the United States to conduct counter-narcotics operations in international waters against drug traffickers believed to be taking substances into the United States. Meaning, effectively, that the U.S. Coast Guard can apply U.S. law to vessels on the high seas that don't declare nationality. So we do that through something that we like to call a right of approach. Right, so, a small vessel like this that I think might be involved in some sort of drug trafficking, because frankly, who drives a 44-foot long fiberglass open-top boat 400 miles off the coast of Guatemala with no fishing gear on board? Unless they're engaged in some sort of illicit operation. But I don't know what they're doing, and it's immaterial to me. What I don't know is what their nation state is. So I'll send my small boat out and ascertain their nationality. If they declare that they don't have a nationality, or the master of the vessel refuses to declare nationality, then once we talk to the United States Coast Guard District 11 in San Francisco, we can assume that that vessel has no nationality. And with the authority of a flag officer in the United States Coast Guard can be authorized to board it. If we get to that point, we conduct what's called a right of visit. So at this point, the boarding team is now on board the vessel. The personnel on board the vessel are taken into custody, and the vessel is searched. And, as it turns out, when you're driving around in an open-top 44-foot-long fiberglass vessel with 600 horsepower of outboard motors on the back, inevitably you find something illicit on board. And in this case, this particular case, it was 650 kilograms of cocaine. It is a lot of cocaine. So the problem that we encounter, however, is that the drug cartels are incredibly well financed, as it turns out. So they're able to adapt to our tactics, and they're able to spend an incredible amount of money trying to move product. And the other reality is, they accept some loss as part of their business model. Whatever percentage that we happen to be getting while we're out there is just part of the cost of doing business. This is a typical vessel. So you can see here, about 40 feet long, complete fiberglass construction, an incredible number of outboard motors. Right? Usually legitimate fishermen aren't driving around with 3 outboards. All these containers here are fuel, because they have to get all the way from Ecuador to Guatemala in an open-top boat at 40 knots. So you use an incredible amount of fuel. And what's interesting about these panga vessels, they're built in the exact same style as a conventional fishing vessel that you would see in Central and Latin America. But they're built from the ground up with the cocaine inside them. So the cocaine will be in here, and the vessel is actually fiberglassed right around the product. So the only way that you can get the cocaine out usually is through smashing a hole inside the hull of the vessel to actually find it. This is becoming commonplace now too. Self-propelled semi-submersible. Okay? While this guy can carry 650 kilograms of cocaine, this one here can carry 6 tons of cocaine or more. They move at very slow speeds, about 8 knots. They don't actually submerge, but as you can imagine, finding that on the horizon would be very, very difficult. It's only a couple of feet off the water. And because they paint them blue, they're also incredibly hard to find from aircraft. But there's good news on that front. Operating a self-propelled semi-submersible is actually illegal. So the United Nations has outlawed that. So I see that guy, it doesn't matter whether he's got drugs on board or not, he's automatically going to get boarded. But what they do is they'll scuttle their vessel, and they turn it into a SOLAS situation, at which point I have to pull them out of the water. This is from 2007, and I don't have a more current version of this slide, but it's instructive for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're talking about 367 separate known events of drug trafficking between South America, the Caribbean, and the Eastern Pacific in 2007. We've become very good at this, at stopping this flow of traffic, to the point where most of the activity in the Caribbean side is moving to the Eastern Pacific. Why? Why would that be? Well, it's incredibly easy to saturate that area with aircraft and ships, especially when you've got cooperative countries in Jamaica, the Dominican Republic. Cuba does a pretty reasonable job of taking care of their own maritime approaches. So the drug traffickers have realized that, well, this is becoming too risky, so why don't we just move all of our product here? And in fact, if you think about it from just a layman's perspective, it makes even more sense. There's less things for the random boat to run into in the middle of the night because there's no land. And the other fact is, you can give somebody nothing more than drive this boat that way until you see land, then turn north. Because if you do, you head out to the Galapagos and you turn directly north, magically you're in Guatemala. And if you can get the product to Guatemala, you can get it road access into Mexico. And the rest of it is pretty easy from there. So if this slide were the 2012 or 2013 slide, there'd be much more red on the Eastern Pacific side. because there are so many countries, so many naval assets, and so many air units available in the Caribbean side. This is the problem though. The Eastern Pacific is incredibly large. The area that they're moving the product through is the size of Canada. At any given time, we have anywhere between 4 to 7 ships patrolling it. So, we maximize the resources that we have. Air cover is critical to our conduct of Op Caribbe. This yellow piece here indicates the average range of a maritime patrol aircraft based out of El Salvador. So that's mainly where we're going to patrol, because it just makes sense. Because if you have the aircraft, you've got eyes on the contact, you can close the contact, get a boarding team on board. The rest of it is incredibly large and incredibly difficult to find in it. But there's more good news. We don't really have to worry about the coast of Mexico as much, because the Mexican Navy is incredibly adept and becoming very, very good at doing their own drug interdiction stuff, so they're not relying on the United States Coast Guard, the Royal Canadian Navy, or the US Navy. So that's great. And at the end of the day, that's exactly why we're there. We're not there to get drugs. The drugs look good, numbers are wonderful. But we're really there to add stability to Central and Latin America. Because if you don't have stability, you end up a lot like Oaxaca State in the southern part of Mexico today. And a lot of that instability is being caused by the money that is flowing back from all this drug trafficking. JIDA South isn't just an intelligence fusion facility. They track something all the way from the very beginning of the intercept all the way to the end of prosecution. So when we get these people, when they're arrested by the United States Coast Guard, we turn them over to a United States Coast Guard vessel on the high seas or a United States Navy vessel. The detainees and the contraband are sent back to the United States. So they will be prosecuted in the United States, primarily in New York State and Florida. So this has been a great operation for the Canadian Armed Forces. Number one, it totally ties in with the global engagement strategy that the federal government has been espousing for a very long time in Latin America. It allows me, as a ship's captain, to go out there and actually interdict drugs with the help of the US Coast Guard and build capability and capacity in Guatemala when I'm there. I visited with the Guatemalan Navy on multiple occasions. We take Guatemalan sailors to sea to teach them how to do surveillance operations. Because right now, Guatemala's Navy and their Coast Guard are very much in the infancy of their at-sea capability. Since 2011 alone, we've intercepted 51 tons of cocaine from the Caribbean side and the Eastern Pacific side. It's an incredible number. It's not about the number though, it's really about what the value of that is. And that's about $1.3 billion worth of cocaine. So, we also got 5 tons of marijuana. Is it marijuana that we really care about? Strategically, no. It's the cash value of that 5 tons of marijuana that we're really trying to get. So in 2016, just the last Op Caribbe deployment that we did, which for the East Coast ship started in January and for us started in February, we sent 4 KINGSTON Class vessels down, and we got a little over 4 tons of cocaine and over 1.5 tons of marijuana. Those ships in total were each deployed for about 40 days apiece. It's a pretty good haul for a very resource-light naval unit like the KINGSTON Class. Our return on investment is pretty good. So again, this fall, we'll be sending 4 more KINGSTON Class ships, including myself again. And we repeat that usually in the spring and the winter months every year. And we have been doing that since about 2013. Is everybody familiar with the KINGSTON Class? No? Wonderful. Let me tell you a story about my home. They were built in the mid-90s to completely civilian specs. They're not heavily armed. Right now we only carry 250 cal heavy machine guns. That's it. Carry a couple of boats and a very small crew. They look great on an Eastern Pacific sunset. 970 tons displacement, which makes them way smaller than a Canadian patrol frigate or a destroyer. Only 183 feet long. I'm only about 30 feet wide. There are 12 of them that were built. They're all named after cities, hence HMCS Edmonton. 5 on each coast are operational at any given time. We usually have 2 in refit. We do a 60 monthly refit cycle. And I have racks on board for 47 people. That's it. The great benefit is, though, I'm incredibly fuel efficient. Diesel electric platform, I can go 5,500 nautical miles on a mere 150,000 liters of diesel fuel. Sounds like a lot, but if you compare it to a frigate will burn through 600,000 liters of diesel fuel in a couple of weeks. Relatively small ship. Z-drive azipod thrusters, incredibly maneuverable, not extraordinarily fast, limited to about 15.5, 16 knots, about 30 kilometers an hour. So we're not going to be chasing anybody down. That's why we have boats and aircraft. That's an entire crew of a KINGSTON Class ship and a law enforcement detachment, all up on the forecastle at the same time. Just to give you some perspective on how small the crew actually is. So I've jammed all of my crew onto this part of the forecastle. Very small crew, easy to feed, right? Close teamwork environment. A lot of people say that the minor war vessels are kind of like submarines. Submarine crews are very small as well. So everybody's got multiple secondary duties, and we all support each other. It's a great environment to work in. So before we go down and do Op Caribbe, we do workups, which we now call intermediate multi-ship readiness training. Still workups. So on our way down, we do force protection training, we do navigation training, we do casualty management training, obviously, and firefighting and damage control. You may be aware that we lost a tanker not so long ago to a catastrophic fire on board. So the firefighting and damage control aspect remains critically important to sustaining naval operations at sea. So I was lucky. In 2012, we were planning to send West Coast KINGSTON Class ships on Operation Caribbe. We'd never done it before with a law enforcement detachment on board a ship this small. So in 2012, we went down to San Diego, embarked a law enforcement detachment, and did an exercise with the Mexican Navy. And it worked. We were actually able to integrate a U.S. Coast Guard law enforcement detachment on board. So with the proof of concept being proven, in 2013, in the fall, we deployed down for Op Caribbe for the very first time in the West Coast KINGSTON Class with a law enforcement detachment. I'd like to say that we knew what we were doing, but we really didn't. We were just going out there and hoping for the best. We spent 59 days actually deployed in the box, so in total we were away from home for a little over 3 months. But we had success. Edmonton alone was involved in the disruption or seizure of 2,000 kilograms of cocaine. Our sister ship Yellowknife was in much the same boat, no pun intended. We sailed 13,000 nautical miles down to the box and back, and it was a really successful deployment. So much so that since that actual deployment, we've been doing 4 of them a year. So what do you do with 650 kilograms of cocaine on a 970-ton ship?
Good time.
So first off, we have to bring the contraband on board. And there's a whole host of reasons why, but I'll just make it really plain. A vessel that size is not very seaworthy when it's not moving. And when you get the Coast Guard law enforcement detachment on board, the very first thing they want to do is get 600 kilograms worth of ballast off so that the vessel becomes more seaworthy and they're safer. So what we do is we'll try to get the cocaine on board our ship as fast as possible so that the Coast Guard can continue with their search of the vessel and detaining the detainees. It's important to note, and I can't stress it enough, that I am in a support role to the Coast Guard. I do not take detainees on board, and I do not involve my ship's company in law enforcement. Full stop. I'm there to support the U.S. Coast Guard. I provide them with a rib and a way to get on board the vessel. And this is what we find.
But you have a police contingent on your vessel.
Negative. The U.S. Coast Guard is the police detachment. Because keeping in mind, in the United States Coast Guard is a law enforcement agency.
Right.
They're part of the Department of Homeland Security. They're not part of the Department of the Navy anymore. So this is what cocaine looks like on the high seas. That was 2013. So we went again in 2016. This time I was lucky enough to be in command of the ship instead of just being the XO. So we went off and we found ourselves at pretty much the same place, about 2,000 kilograms of cocaine again. Our deployment was much shorter. The slide says 48, the answer is actually 44. And we only spent 80 days away from Esquimalt this time. Sailed 10,000 miles, but still saw similar success to what we've been used to in the past. I should add that in 2015, Whitehorse and Brandon went down and actually caught a self-propelled semi-submersible. They got about 6,000 kilograms of cocaine. So what does it look like when you're out there in the middle of the ocean trying to find somebody who's riding a fishing vessel around at 30 knots? It looks an awful lot like this. See these guys on the horizon? We launched the rib with the Coast Guard law enforcement detachment already on board, and the rib intercepts the vessel. A lot of people ask me questions. They say, Lucas, aren't you worried that these guys are going to have weapons and shoot back? Sure. But the Coast Guard law enforcement detachment and my boat's crew are trained in force protection. The reality is, the cartels aren't interested. They don't want anybody taking shots at a gray-hulled ship, because the inevitable conclusion of that would be more gray-hulled ships, and that more of their product getting lost, more of a cost to their business model. So the status quo works pretty well for the cartels. And honestly, the people inside that vessel have very little self-interest in getting involved in anything worse than they've already been caught doing. They're going to jail. That much is inevitable. So we send the boat out, and you can see sort of in the picture, it's on a greatest resolution shot, that they already have their hands up in the vessel as their ribs making the approach. Again, the modus operandi, get the cocaine, get it on board the ship to provide extra stability and security to the Coast Guard guys that are actually on board the drug trafficking vessel. It's not elegant, but it works. Okay, so you'll see here, one of my crew members is helping the Coast Guard with bringing the bales on board. But remember, the chain of custody is paramount at all times in law enforcement operations. So while I step away from the microphone, hopefully you can still hear me. Coast Guard guy there, Coast Guard guy there, and a Coast Guard guy in the boat. So at all times, that chain of custody remains firmly entrenched. There's no concern that my leading seaman is going to get himself called before a court of law to testify because he was the last guy to touch cocaine. And so the chain of custody is preserved by the Coast Guard. We're providing support. So, detainees stay on board the vessel. U.S. Coast Guard ship or U.S. Navy ship that happens to be operating in the area will come to me. And they're going to come to me so that I can give them the contraband and they can take the detainees from the vessel. So, in this particular case, because I had a photo technician on board, he wanted a picture of me talking to the U.S. Coast Guard. Normally, the captain's not down on the sweep deck helping transfer cocaine, but anyway. So we moved the contraband from our ship into the Coast Guard ribs, and the Coast Guard ribs will do the runs back and forth to their ship to bring the contraband. But it's not all about drugs. It's all about projecting Canadian values wherever in the world we're operating, as it's part of our job. Out in the Eastern Pacific, you will find an incredible number of illegal fishing nets and fishing traps set up. And so as part of what we do, we see these things, we'll send a boat out and dismantle this fishing gear, bring it on board the ship, and then return it as garbage when we get to the next port. And we do that because we, in Canada, believe in environmental sustainability and environmental responsibility. This picture of Master Seaman Don Merlot rescuing a loggerhead sea turtle from this net was the one picture that National Defense Public Affairs really, really wanted for my trip. Because it's a great shot, because it shows a whole bunch more than just the drug trafficking and the numbers. It shows that even the small things that we do while we're down there may potentially make a difference to a loggerhead sea turtle, who is a happy guy.
Must have weighed a lot. My God, that's not an easy lift.
I didn't ask him how difficult it was for him to get the loggerhead sea turtle out of the net. It was already hot enough. One thing I'd be remiss in not mentioning is the fact that in not so far distant past, Kingston Class ships were crewed nearly 100% by reservists. And it's important to note that even today, 60% of my crew is primary reserve. And generally, for a Caribbe deployment, 2 to 6 of those individuals will be Class A reservists that have taken a leave of absence from work or taken a semester off school to come do Op Caribbe. So if you think about that in a whole one Navy construct, that's a pretty good thing. And it's great for the guys that come out and do it, I should say the guys and gals, that come up and do it, because they go back to their civilian employment having done an actual operation, which is something that we've done very little of in the Kingston class. I can name 2. Operation Podium in 2010, which was security of the Olympic Games, and now Operation Caribbe. And, I might add, just a couple of weeks ago, we finally got buy-off that the Kingston class are now eligible for foreign service premium and hazard and risk duty allowance while deployed on Operation Caribbe. And doubly interesting, we're the only class of ship that's eligible for that. That's a lot of staff work. This is a nice picture I like to end with because it's never really like that in the Eastern Pacific. It's not that calm that often. So it was that calm, the sun was setting, we sent out the boat. And that's right in the middle of the ocean, 400 miles off the coast of Guatemala. And it's 45 degrees. So it's more pleasant to look at than it is to see.
This has been another in the ongoing series of podcasts brought to you as an educational service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. You can keep abreast of our web offerings as well as our live events by visiting our website at www.rcmi.org. Once again, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for being with us and good night.